"Excuse me, sir, but this seat has been reassigned to a more important passenger." The cold voice of Chief Flight Attendant Cheryl Lawson sliced through the air like a knife. The entire first-class cabin of Aurelia Air's flight from Newark to Chicago fell into silence. Harsh white LED light illuminated the calm face of the man seated in one, a Jordan Pierce, 38 years old, the CEO of the very airline they were flying on, though no one knew that this morning. He wore a plain white T-shirt, faded blue jeans, and worn sneakers. No ring, no luxury watch. Nothing about him suggested power except the quiet steadiness in his gaze. Cheryl, dressed immaculately in her perfectly pressed uniform, stood tall with her chin slightly raised. The scent of her expensive perfume overpowered even the new leather fragrance of the first-class seats. "There must be some mistake," Jordan said, slowly looking up, his voice calm and deep enough to make Cheryl hesitate for a fraction of a second. "I checked in early this morning." But Cheryl didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed glued to the tablet in her hand, as if afraid to meet something she shouldn't see. "The system shows that you don't meet the qualifications for this seat, sir. Please move to seat 12C. A wave of murmurs spread across the cabin. Expensive suits rustled, newspapers lowered. Someone gave a low whistle. A white woman frowned, her expression tinged with disdain. Jordan remained still. A familiar sting rose inside him, that silent humiliation he thought he had buried long ago. He glanced around and noticed Emily Park, a young flight attendant, standing slightly behind Cheryl, her face tense, her hands clasped tightly together. "I paid for a first-class ticket," Jordan said clearly, each word deliberate. "I have every right to sit here." Cheryl snapped the tablet shut with a sharp click. "You have 30 seconds to vacate the seat, or I'll have to call security." Before Jordan could respond, the intercom crackled to life. "Boarding completed. Cabin crew prepare for departure." The plane door closed. Every eye in the cabin turned toward him. An older man in the next row whispered, "What's going on?" Jordan drew a steady breath, his tone calm but firm. "If there's an error in the system, you should fix it, not throw a paying customer out of his seat." Cheryl said nothing more. She pressed a button on the internal phone. "Captain Mercer, I need you in first class. We have a passenger refusing to comply." Heavy footsteps echoed down the aisle. Captain Daniel Mercer appeared tall and broad-shouldered, in his early 50s. His salt-and-pepper hair neatly combed, his steel blue eyes cold and sharp. He looked Jordan over from head to toe, the way someone might inspect an intruder who didn't belong. Sir Mercer said curtly, "For the safety of this flight, I need your cooperation in moving to your reassigned seat." "Flight safety?" Jordan raised an eyebrow. "How does sitting in the seat I paid for threaten flight safety?" Mercer avoided his gaze. "This directive comes from Mr. Hargrove, the Chief Operating Officer. There were certain adjustments made for higher-tier passengers." The name made Jordan tilt his head slightly. David Hargrove, the man he had entrusted with day-to-day operations for the past 6 months. "Since when does the COO have authority to reassign passenger seating?" Jordan asked quietly, but Mercer only tightened his grip on his cap, his lips pressed into a thin line. Behind them, another passenger, an older Asian man, was being told to leave his business-class seat because of a data error. Jordan saw it and felt his stomach tighten. A string of so-called mistakes, each one targeting those who didn't have the right color. Sir Mercer repeated his tone hard, as steel. "If you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to remove you from the aircraft. And as a reminder, the CEO has granted the operations team full authority to dismiss any disruptive personnel or passengers. A faint smile crossed Jordan's lips. The CEO, he thought. They were using his own power to threaten him. Emily took a hesitant half-step forward, her voice trembling. "Captain, maybe we should—" "Silence, Emily." Cheryl snapped, her voice cutting like ice, "unless you'd like to join him in court." The air grew thick and heavy. Jordan met Cheryl's gaze. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then he nodded slowly. "All right," he said evenly. "But I'll be documenting this." "Documenting?" Cheryl sneered. "Suit yourself." Jordan stood lifting his small carry-on bag. His eyes passed over each face. Cheryl Lawson, Captain Daniel Mercer, and the young attendant Emily Park, the only one who couldn't hide the shame in her eyes. As he walked out of first class, whispers rose again. A few people pretended not to look, but their eyes followed him, filled with judgment. In row 3, a white businessman in an Armani suit leaned back and smirked. The aisle felt impossibly long, a walk of silent humiliation. Jordan noticed 3 other passengers being reassigned as well, a young black man, a Middle Eastern couple, all of them with their heads bowed. He stopped at row 12, the cramped economy cabin. The air smelled of reheated meals, the seats narrow, the noise constant. Only a few steps separated first class from economy, yet it felt like 2 different worlds. Cheryl followed her heels, striking sharply against the floor. "Here's your seat, 12C, she said coldly. "A place more fitting for someone like you." Jordan looked at her, his voice calm but heavy as stone. "I'll remember this, every face, every word." "Is that a threat?" Cheryl lifted her chin. "No," he said softly, eyes never leaving hers. "It's a promise." She scoffed and turned away. Jordan raised his phone. The camera was already recording. When Cheryl reached to grab it, he stepped back. "Careful, Miss Lawson," he warned quietly. "Attempting to seize a passenger's personal property constitutes assault." Her face paled before she snapped back coldly. "Recording crew members without consent is a federal violation." Jordan looked up at her, voice steady. "And discriminating against someone because of their skin color is a human rights violation. Which one do you think is worse?" The plane trembled slightly as the engines roared to life. It was 7 o'clock in the morning, and the cabin doors were sealed. No one could enter or leave now. Jordan sat down in seat 12C between 2 passengers, avoiding eye contact. His heart pounded, not with anger, but with resolve. He looked up at the metallic ceiling light gleaming across its surface and whispered to himself, "Fine. If they think I'm just another ordinary black passenger, they're about to learn a lesson they'll never forget." A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, merging with the deep rumble of the engines. The wings tilted, lifting the aircraft into the sky. In that moment, humiliation turned to fire, and Jordan Pierce knew this flight would change everything. The engines roared steadily as the Aurelia Air Airbus sliced through the clouds, morning light slashing through the windows like thin blades. In the economy cabin, Jordan Pierce sat motionless in seat 12C, not out of helplessness but calculation. He was no longer a humiliated passenger. He was the owner watching his company crack from within its own walls of steel and glass. The phone in his hand was still glowing. Strangely, the signal hadn't dropped. Jordan opened his voice recorder, then switched to hidden video. The icy voice of Cheryl Lawson, the sharp clicking of her heels, the condescending laughter of a few passengers, every sound was being captured. With each passing second, the evidence grew. Up front, Captain Daniel Mercer had returned to first class. He passed Emily Park without looking at her once. Emily kept her head down, her heart torn apart. She had dreamed of becoming a flight attendant to bring smiles to passengers. Now she only wished she could disappear from the place that dared to call itself premium service. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, Jordan opened the airline's internal messaging app and typed a short, encrypted message to the Chief Financial Officer, Rachel Monroe, and the head of legal, Alan Drew. The message was brief: Hargrove. Flight 127. Evidence of discrimination. Prepare immediate response protocol. The screen showed delivered. Jordan exhaled softly. A minute later, Emily appeared carrying a drink tray, her smile strained. She bent slightly, as if serving him her words, barely a whisper. "Mr. Pierce, I'm sorry." Jordan looked straight at her. "It's all right. You're not like them." She bit her lip, whispering, "I can't let this keep happening." They call it the Premium Passenger Initiative. It sounds elegant, but it's about sorting people. Jordan tilted his head. "They planned this." "Yes." "Last week there was a closed meeting with Mr. David Hargrove. They promised a 50% pay raise if we could enhance the first-class experience. We all knew what that really meant. Only those who look successful get to stay." A chill crept down Jordan's spine. Hargrove, the man he had trusted, the one who had stood on stage preaching about diversity and respect. And behind those slogans was something far more insidious. Emily glanced toward the front. Cheryl was chatting with a white man in a grey suit, seated in one, A. Richard Caldwell Hargrove's investment partner. She turned back and whispered, "The man in seat 1A is the priority guest. Hargrove wants his funding." Jordan nodded slightly. "Who else is involved?" She whispered quickly, as though afraid the air itself might hear. "Cheryl Captain Mercer, the 2 co-pilots, Ethan Cole and Mark Dalton, 3 flight attendants, Tiffany Morgan, Rachel Bennett and Olivia Carter, plus Hargrove and Caldwell. 9 people. They call themselves the Premium Standards Team." Jordan memorized every name. He knew that one document, one signature could bring them all down. "Can you help me gather proof?" he asked quietly. Emily swallowed hard. "I'll try. When Cheryl serves drinks in first class, she always keeps her tablet open. I can take photos." "You know the risk?" Jordan asked. She nodded. "I became a flight attendant to serve, not to humiliate others." The simple sentence carried the weight of a vow. She turned and pushed the beverage cart toward the front, her face calm, pretending to work. Jordan watched her go, his heart beat, quickening a mix of hope and tension. 20 minutes later, a soft ping sounded. A message appeared from an anonymous number 3 files attached. He opened them. Photos filled the screen, each stamped with the Aurelia Air logo. The first image, Customer Profile Assessment Guidelines. Columns labeled Appearance Voice, Clothing, Brand Skin Tone. At the bottom, a line read, "Passengers scoring below 30 points will be reassigned to optimize premium experience." The second image, a group chat named Premium Standards Team. A message from Hargrove read, "Remember success of this campaign equals 50% bonuses. We are redefining luxury travel." Below it was Cheryl's reply, "Finally some real standards for first class. I'm tired of serving certain types of people up here." Captain Mercer had responded with a thumbs-up emoji. The third image, Relocation Success Metrics. A list of dozens of names marked as relocated. At the top, Jordan froze at one entry, Pierce J. tagged, "Success." He let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Their definition of success was humiliating the very founder of their airline. Jordan forwarded all of it to Alan Drew, the head of legal evidence acquired. Proceed with termination protocol. Meanwhile, in first class, Emily continued serving. Cheryl poured wine for Caldwell, smiling sweetly. "You'll find, sir, in this cabin we make sure no one disturbs you. Especially certain people," Caldwell said, smirking toward the back. They both laughed. Emily clenched her jaw. Pretending to pick up a fallen napkin, she lifted her phone and quickly snapped 3 photos of Cheryl's open tablet, emails, classification charts, meeting schedules. She slipped the phone into her pocket, her heart pounding. When she turned, Captain Mercer was standing there, his eyes suspicious. "What are you doing here?" "Just wiping tables." "Captain?" she said, steadying her voice. He stared a moment, then walked away. Emily hurried back to economy, almost running. Jordan looked up, seeing the pale fear on her face. She placed a plastic cup on his tray and whispered, "There are emails and meeting notes, too." "I sent everything." Jordan nodded. "You just saved this airline." She smiled weakly. "I just did what's right. I don't want my niece growing up in a world where people must have the right skin color to be respected." Jordan looked at her deep respect rising within him. In the dim cabin light, her face seemed to glow with quiet courage. He resumed typing. A message from Alan Drew appeared, sufficient evidence for immediate termination. Possible criminal charges, awaiting CEO authorization. Jordan leaned back and closed his eyes. Behind his lids he saw every face: Hargrove, Cheryl, Mercer, Caldwell. 9 of them. 9 people signing their own downfall. The plane trembled slightly as it began its descent. Jordan opened his eyes. Emily returned, pushing the snack cart, pretending to serve, but discreetly slipping him a folded note. Inside was a handwritten list of all 9 names and ID numbers with a trembling line beneath, "For my grandmother." For everyone they hurt, Jordan clenched the paper in his hand, his pulse steady but fierce. His anger had turned from fire to the cold steel of justice. He typed his final message to the head of security. James assembled the team at Gate Hotel 8 O'Hare. 9 targets. On landing. He looked out the window. The skyline of Chicago was emerging beyond the clouds, the horizon glowing like a curtain before a coming storm. Up front, laughter still echoed. Cheryl refilled Caldwell's glass, and he raised it with a grin. Flying Aurelia Air now, that's true class. They had no idea that in seat 12, Ceci, the man they had humiliated, was writing the indictment that would end their careers in just 35 minutes. Jordan Pierce lifted his camera once more, the glow of the screen reflected in his unwavering eyes. "Game over," he whispered. The plane glided onward, cutting through the white clouds, peaceful, almost serene, just before the real storm began. The first-class cabin of Aurelia Air Flight 127 remained quiet, almost perfect. But only on the surface, behind the dividing curtain, a storm was forming. Jordan Pierce sat upright in seat 12C, the cool blue glow of his phone screen washing over his face. A message from Chief Financial Officer Rachel Monroe had just arrived. "Everything is ready. On your command, all accounts belonging to David Hargrove will be frozen. Legal is standing by for emergency action." Jordan drew a deep breath. There were 20 minutes left until landing, 20 minutes to collect the final piece and bring down the entire web of deceit. A soft ding sounded the signal to move about the cabin. Emily Park appeared at the front of economy, pushing a small service cart and holding a stack of napkins. Her face was pale with worry, but her eyes burned with resolve. She stopped beside Jordan, pretending to adjust his tray. "This is the original," she whispered. Jordan frowned. Original what? Emily gently unfolded the napkin to reveal a thick sheet of paper, slightly wrinkled, still smelling of fresh ink. Project Premium Passenger Initiative, confidential meeting minutes. The company logo sat at the top of the first page. At the bottom, a row of slanted signatures: David Hargrove, Cheryl Lawson, Captain Daniel Mercer, the two first officers, Ethan Cole and Mark Dalton, the three flight attendants, Tiffany Morgan, Rachel Bennett and Olivia Carter, all clear as fingerprints. Jordan felt the blood still. Every signature was a bullet. He skimmed fast. The polished corporate language glinted like a gilded blade. Optimize first-class demographics, elevate brand value through selective passenger imagery, ensure a unified visual standard for the premium customer experience. Behind those phrases, Jordan saw only one naked truth: systemic racial discrimination, carved in the cold language of business. He turned to page 3. At the bottom was a handwritten note: 1A through 4, reserved for white passengers. 5A through 6, D light-skinned minorities, acceptable if appropriately dressed. Under 30 points, mandatory relocation. Next to 1A, a red pen note read, never allow obvious minorities in this seat. Brand model seat. Jordan closed his eyes. He remembered a meeting 1 year ago when he stood before the company and declared his vision: Aurelia Air will be an airline of respect. Now that vision had been twisted into a weapon to exclude the very people he had sworn to protect. He raised his phone, photographed every page, and sent them to Alan Drew. The reply arrived in seconds: sufficient grounds for civil rights violations and corporate fraud charges. You may terminate immediately. No notice required. Awaiting CEO command. Jordan inhaled, looked up at Emily. Do you know what you just did? She pressed her lips together. I do. And I am not afraid. A rare, genuine smile touched his face. Thank you, Emily. You just saved the soul of this airline. She nodded and pushed the cart forward, heading back to first class. She knew every step was a risk, but she kept going because she believed in something larger than herself: justice. Up front, Cheryl Lawson poured wine for Richard Caldwell, the more important man who had claimed 1A. Caldwell tipped his glass, tasting expensive champagne, a half-smile on his lips. Flying with Aurelia Air truly is different, he said. We deliver the level of class our true customers deserve, Cheryl replied, proud, as if she had just won a medal. Emily stood a few steps away, hands trembling but eyes steady. She watched Cheryl set her tablet on the galley counter and turn away. Emily dipped to pick up a few cups, snapped 2 more photos, final shots of the tablet screen internal email subject lines, reading, official rollout next month, policy expansion across the entire network. She hid the phone and returned to economy. Jordan was waiting. She had time only for a small nod. We have everything now, he said, and they have no idea. The intercom sounded. We are beginning our descent into Chicago. Please fasten your seatbelts. Jordan buckled in, eyes fixed on the screen. A message from Head of Security. James Wright lit-up team is in position at Gate Hotel 8. 9 subjects, police and human resources standing by, awaiting your signal. Jordan replied, prepare conference room A, doors locked. Upon touchdown, hold them. He lifted his gaze toward the thin curtain. Cheryl was beaming, certain she had won Captain Mercer beside her, both laughing at something he said. Jordan recognized the smile of blind power, the kind he had seen in boardrooms years ago before. He learned that power without ethics is an empty shell. He stood. An economy attendant whispered, surprised, sir, we are on final descent. Jordan only smiled, I know. He walked the aisle slowly, every eye tracking him. At the curtain, Emily waited, head slightly bowed. "They are all up front," she murmured. "Thank you," he answered. "Now stand with the truth." Jordan pulled the curtain aside. White light poured in. First class went silent. Caldwell froze with his glass halfway up. Cheryl turned the smile hardening on her lips. Jordan stepped forward, his voice clear. "Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jordan Pierce, the Chief Executive Officer of Aurelia Air." No one moved. A few passengers raised their phones to record. Cheryl's mouth fell open. You are lying." The real CEO, Jordan, drew out his ID badge and held it high. The company logo flashed under the lights. "You can verify it in the system or on the very tablet you have been using to classify your passengers." Captain Mercer went chalk white. Caldwell set his glass down, spine pressed into the seat. 35 minutes ago, Jordan continued, "You threw a man out of seat 1A because he did not look classy enough. You called it brand standards. I call it racism." Cheryl's voice shook. "We were simply following the Chief Operating Officer's directives. Mr. Hargrove, and I will handle Hargrove Jordan, cut in. His accounts are already frozen. As for you," he paused, letting his gaze rest on each face, "you have just signed your own resignations." No one spoke. The engines still thundered, yet first class felt smaller, airless. Jordan drew out the original document and raised it. "Here are your signatures on the Premium Passenger Initiative, a project to sort customers by skin color, by voice, and by clothing brand. 9 signatures. Everyone is here." Silence stretched. Cheryl began to cry. Captain Mercer stared at the floor. Caldwell's eyes darted around, searching for an exit. Jordan lowered his voice, each word striking like a hammer. "You turned my airline into a stage for prejudice. You stripped passengers of their dignity, and with it your own." He turned to the other passengers. "I am sorry for what happened here today. This is not the Aurelia Air I built. Every passenger who was relocated today will receive compensation and free travel for the next year." A small burst of applause rose from the rear cabin. A black woman called out, "Thank you, sir." Jordan nodded, eyes never leaving the group before him. "Upon landing, you will surrender your ID badges, your wings, and all company property. Human Resources and the police are waiting. You are terminated immediately for discriminatory conduct." Caldwell lurched to his feet. "You cannot do this." Jordan met his eyes. "I cannot. I founded this company, and I choose to stand with justice." A breathless pause followed. Then Emily Park stepped forward from the back of the cabin, her voice shaky but clear. "Everything Mr. Pierce has said is true. I am a witness, and I have the evidence." Every gaze shifted to her. Jordan gave a slight nod. In that instant, a CEO and a young flight attendant stood together like twin flames of truth. The intercom crackled, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just touched down at Chicago O'Hare. Welcome to the City of Justice." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Jordan looked out the window. Dawn light flooded the runway, blinding and warm. He knew that from this moment on, Aurelia Air would never be the same. The sky outside was still blue, but on this flight, a storm of justice had officially begun. The Aurelia Air Airbus on Flight 127 kissed the runway with a gentle bounce, then thundered forward through the hiss of wind. Inside the cabin, no one dared breathe. The weight of silence pressed on every seat. In the front row, Cheryl Lawson stared down, mascara smeared around her eyes. Beside her, Captain Daniel Mercer clutched his cap, his shoulders trembling. The 2 first officers, Ethan Cole and Mark Dalton, sat rigid as statues, eyes averted. And behind them, the 3 flight attendants, Tiffany Morgan, Rachel Bennett, and Olivia Carter, bowed their heads as tears soaked their collars. In the middle of the cabin stood Jordan Pierce, unflinching the man they had humiliated for not fitting their idea of first class. "Welcome to Chicago, O'Hare." Mercer's shaky voice crackled over the intercom. "Please remain seated until the indicator is off." The seatbelt light went dark, but no one moved, every gaze fixed on Jordan. He lifted his phone, the last message from Head of Security. James Wright glowing on the screen. "Team is in position at Gate Hotel 8. Human Resources and Legal are present. Local police are awaiting your signal." Jordan gave a slight nod, then looked back to Emily Park at the rear galley, her hands gripping a service tray. Their eyes met. No words needed. Both understood the hour of truth had come. Jordan stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "Those I name stand up. Now." No one stirred. Cheryl raised her red eyes. "Mr. Pierce, I am sorry. I only followed orders." Jordan cut in his tone, like ice. "You knew those orders were wrong, and you obeyed them because they carried bonuses, because they made you feel powerful over other people. You were not only wrong, Cheryl, you betrayed yourself." Cheryl broke into sobs. Jordan turned to Mercer. "And you, Captain Mercer, you swore to protect the safety and dignity of passengers, but today you used your rank to threaten to remove, to look away from injustice. You are not worthy of the wings on your chest." Mercer bowed his head, the words catching in his throat. "I did not know who you were." Jordan held his gaze. "You did not need to know who I am to act with decency. Human dignity does not require a title to be respected." The cabin fell still. The passengers who had seen him forced out of first class now looked at Jordan with admiration. A man of color in row 14 called out. He was right from the start. A ripple of applause began and spread through the cabin. Emily lowered her head, tears of relief falling. When the clapping faded, Jordan spoke again, slow and resolute. 35 minutes ago, you believed you could measure human worth by skin color and clothing. 35 minutes later, you will learn that justice does not classify." He pressed the call key. James opened the door. The cabin door swung wide. White morning light poured in, along with the security team in black suits and 2 Chicago officers waiting on the jet bridge. James Wright stepped aboard, face set. "Welcome back to solid ground, Mr. Pierce." Jordan nodded. "Escort the violating employees to Conference Room A. Human Resources and Legal will proceed." James faced the 9. "Your names are recorded. Please come with me." Cheryl rose first, trying to gather a shred of pride, but her steps shook. "You have ruined us," she whispered. Jordan met her eyes voice even. "No, you ruined yourself, Cheryl. I only shone a light where you chose to hide." She lowered her head, tears spilling. Captain Mercer followed in silence. The first officers fell in behind the others, sobbing as they removed their wings from their chests. Symbols of pride turned into stains of ambition and prejudice. When the aircraft door closed behind them, Jordan stood still and let his eyes fall shut for a moment. He heard the wind along the jetway and felt a strange heaviness and a strange relief. Behind him, passengers rose one by one. An elderly Asian gentleman approached and took Jordan's hand. "Thank you. You made me believe there is still justice in this world." Jordan squeezed the trembling hand. "Thank you. Justice exists only when we refuse to be silent." 15 minutes later, Conference Room A at the Aurelia Air Terminal in Chicago burned under cold fluorescent light. On the table, 9 neatly stacked files, each with a termination letter. No severance, no reference. "Head of Human Resources." Amanda Grant stood at the head of the table, voice firm. Based on verified evidence, these 9 individuals are terminated immediately for discriminatory conduct and severe professional misconduct, Cheryl cried out. This is wrongful termination. We only followed company policy. General Counsel Alan Drew opened his laptop and projected the document titled Project Premium Passenger Initiative, every signature visible. This is not policy. This is a scheme. And each of you conspired. Mercer gripped his head, gasping. I only wanted to keep my job. Jordan entered calm, no longer the man driven from 1A, but the one holding authority, without a trace of gloating in his eyes. 35 minutes ago he said you laughed when I was pushed from my seat. Now I am not laughing, because this is not a victory. It is a tragedy, the tragedy of people trading their humanity for a feeling of superiority. He looked around the table, every word carving the air. Power is not choosing who gets to sit where. Real power is protecting the right people even when no one is watching. Cheryl pressed her face to the table and wept. Mercer closed his eyes. No one answered. Jordan turned to Emily Park, to Lisa Park, to Noah Kim, and to Janet Reed, the 4 who chose the right side when no one else dared. You stood for what is right when others would not. Emily, effective today, you are appointed head of cabin training. I want you to rewrite the entire curriculum. Start with a single word: dignity. Emily's mouth fell open, tears flooding eye. I do not know what to say. Jordan offered a faint smile. You do not need to say anything. Just keep doing what is right. He looked out the conference room window. The Chicago sun lit the runway, where the Aurelia Air logo shimmered. The gleam felt like a reminder that any darkness can be torn open if one person dares to flip the switch. As the terminated group was escorted from the area, the press had arrived. Cameras tracked them, flashes popping, and by mid-morning the story spread across the United States CEO, thrown out of his own first-class seat. 35 minutes later, every perpetrator of discrimination fired at the airport. The hashtag #FlyWithDignity began to surge across social media. Beneath passenger videos, thousands of comments poured in. This is real leadership, one man. One lesson for the entire airline industry. Dignity has no seat class. Jordan stood at the edge of the room, watching it all unfold. Emily stepped over and whispered, So maybe today we did not only reclaim justice, we reclaimed trust. He smiled. And we will not stop here. They lost everything in 35 minutes. We will spend a lifetime rebuilding an airline where everyone flies with dignity. She nodded, eyes bright. Outside the glass, the sun climbed higher. Other Aurelia Air aircraft lined up for takeoff, their engines rolling like a promise that from today, these skies belong to people who act with fairness, without prejudice, without fear. And somewhere out there, Seat 1A still waits for the person who truly deserves it, not for skin color, but for the heart. 2 weeks after the shocking incident, Aurelia Air was no longer the airline it used to be. The company's internal bulletin glowed with a bold headline, Reborn Through Justice, Training the Next Generation. The training hall at the Chicago headquarters was bathed in sunlight. Floor-to-ceiling glass panels reflected the endless blue sky, the same sky where an unseen battle between dignity and prejudice had once been fought. Emily Park, now dressed in a new uniform with the badge that read Head of Cabin Crew Training, stepped up to the podium. She was no longer the trembling girl torn between fear and conscience. Her voice was steady, her eyes fierce with purpose. Welcome to Aurelia Air, the new generation of service. In front of her sat 25 trainees, faces young and old, diverse in race, culture, and background. Some came from Detroit, others from Texas. Among them were former teachers, nurses, and firefighters. They were different in every way, yet united by one belief: respect. Emily smiled, her tone calm but resolute. Before we learn how to serve, we must learn to see one another as human. On the screen behind her appeared an image of Seat 1A, the same photo that had gone viral across the internet. Beneath it, bold white letters read, "Dignity has no class." The room fell silent. Emily walked slowly, looking at each face in the room. 2 weeks ago, this seat was a symbol of humiliation. Today, it is a symbol of change. I'm not standing here because I'm perfect. I'm standing here because I chose not to be silent. She paused, took a deep breath, then continued, "I want you to remember this. On every flight, you have the power to restore someone's faith in humanity, with a smile, with fairness, or simply by refusing to turn away when something is wrong." From the front row, Maria Rodriguez, a Latina trainee, raised her hand. "Miss Emily, what if we face the same situation you did when someone above us is wrong? What should we do?" The entire room held its breath. Emily met her gaze and smiled gently. "Remember, this silence is the politest form of complicity with injustice. If you can't speak up out of fear, at least don't help hide the truth." Applause filled the room. Thomas Washington, a former soldier, nodded firmly. Beside him, Sarah Ahmed, wearing her hijab, wiped away tears. "We don't need to be perfect to do what's right," Emily said. "We just need courage." At the back of the room, a man stood watching quietly. No one recognized him as their CEO, Jordan Pierce. Arms folded, leaning against the wall, his eyes glimmered with pride he could barely contain. He had chosen to step away from the executive floor, to return to where everything began, the place where people were being rebuilt from the ground up. When the break arrived, he walked out among the trainees. Near the coffee station, a short-haired woman whispered to her colleague, "He actually did what no one in this industry dared to. He burned down the weeds so he could plant anew." Jordan heard and smiled. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched, as if witnessing the future take shape through small conversations. Emily approached, startled to see him. "Mr. Pierce, I didn't think you'd be here today. How could I miss the first class of the program I've dreamed about?" he replied warmly. He looked up at a poster on the wall that read, "We serve humanity, not hierarchy." He nodded with approval. "Is that yours?" "Yes," she said. "Then keep it," Jordan replied. "From today, that will be Aurelia Air's official motto." Emily smiled, her eyes glistening. "I just want the trainees to understand that kindness doesn't require a uniform, and respect doesn't need a badge." Jordan looked around the room. "You're doing better than I did when I founded this company." That afternoon, Emily led a role-playing exercise. Sarah Ahmed played a first-class passenger, while James Park, a young Korean trainee, played an economy attendant. Emily observed from the side, instructing everyone to swap roles after each round. When Sarah took a turn in economy, she said, "This seat is a little cramped, but the way I was treated makes it feel bigger." The room burst into laughter. Emily nodded. "Exactly. We can't change the size of the seat, but we can change how it feels to sit in it." Laughter and applause filled the air. The moment was light-hearted, but beneath it lay a profound truth. Service doesn't begin with a tray of drinks, it begins with the way you see people. The session ended to thunderous applause. As the trainees filed out, Jordan approached Emily. "You've taught them what business schools never could," he said. Emily smiled. "And you proved that ethics can be stronger than stocks." They stood together for a moment, gazing out the window. Beyond the glass, Aurelia airplanes took off one after another, each carrying hundreds of people, hundreds of stories, and now a renewed faith. "Did you ever think," Emily asked softly, "that all of this began with just one seat?" Jordan chuckled. "Sometimes to change the world all it takes is one seat and one person brave enough not to leave it." She looked at him, her eyes bright. And today that seat doesn't carry the name 1A anymore. It carries the name Justice. 3 weeks later, Aurelia Air held its first company-wide assembly since the crisis. Over 2,000 employees filled the massive aircraft hangar under a blazing summer sky. Jordan took the stage. Behind him hung a giant banner of Seat 1A, now the emblem of equality. 35 minutes, he began his voice, echoing just 35 minutes on a single flight, but enough to teach us a lesson that will last a lifetime. The crowd fell silent. He scanned the faces before him, those he had once defended, dismissed and challenged. "We once let the world down," he said. "But that gave us the chance to prove that justice never dies. It only sleeps waiting for someone brave enough to wake it." He turned toward the massive screen behind him, where footage played of Emily standing up for him that day. Applause roared through the hangar. Emily blushed, but Jordan only smiled. "This is not the story of a CEO," he said. "It's the story of an ordinary person who dared to stand up. And from this day forward, I hope each of you becomes your own Emily Park, wherever you are." The applause swelled into a chant, "Fly with dignity, fly with dignity." Jordan looked out over the crowd, his voice softening. Justice doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just needs one person who refuses to bow. And when that person stands, the whole world rises. He paused, his eyes drawn to the wide hangar doors where an Aurelia Air jet was lifting into the sky. "The sky never asks who you are," he said. "It only asks if you are ready to fly with the truth." The hangar was silent for a heartbeat. Then someone began to cry. A wave of applause followed, echoing like the engines roaring outside. And in the front row, Emily smiled through her tears. Because she knew today it wasn't just an airline that was reborn. It was faith itself. 6 months after the 1A seat incident, Aurelia Air had become a new symbol of the aviation industry. Revenue was up 18%. But what made Jordan Pierce proud was not the number. It was the everyday stories that bloomed across the company, small acts of kindness spreading from the cockpit to the cabin. The press called it the 1A effect. Other airlines began hosting conferences on ethics in service. Business schools invited Jordan to speak. Yet he always opened with the same line, "I am not teaching business. I am telling a story about a mistake and how I chose to take responsibility for it." On an autumn morning, Jordan was at O'Hare Airport, not to fly, but to observe Flight of Integrity, a new initiative proposed by Emily Park. At the check-in counters, dozens of passengers were being assisted by staff who had just finished the respect in every interaction training. Emily stood nearby, supervising her expression, firm yet full of pride. A black girl about 8 years old held her mother's hand, eyes wide as she looked around. When the agent smiled in greeting, the girl asked hesitantly, "Ma'am, could I please sit by the window?" The agent crouched with a gentle smile. "Of course, little princess. At Aurelia, everyone deserves the seat they hope for." A few steps away, Jordan heard that answer and felt his heart warm. Simple words, the kind he himself had not received 6 months before. He walked over to Emily. "I hear this program was your idea, yes?" Emily said, eyes bright. "I want our staff to start with, 'Yes, we can,' instead of, 'That is not possible.' Sometimes respect is simply not saying no too soon." Jordan smiled. "You are making me feel unnecessary." "Not at all," Emily answered quickly. "You lit the fire. I am just making sure it does not go out." That afternoon, Jordan returned to Aurelia Air headquarters. The glass tower mirrored the clear Chicago sky, but inside he wanted to see another sky, the sky of real change. The 20th floor conference room was full. On the big screen, data showed customer satisfaction rising sharply and positive feedback flooding social media. Beneath the charts, the hashtag #FlyWithDignity continued to spread everywhere. Chief Financial Officer Rachel Monroe reported, "Sir, our brand is being viewed as a global model of a culture of respect. More than 3,000 applicants have applied in just 2 weeks." Jordan nodded, but his gaze drifted. "True success does not live in charts, Rachel. It lives in how people treat one another when there is no camera." The room fell silent. Head of Human Resources, Amanda Grant, asked gently, "You still think about that day, do you not?" Jordan smiled sadly. "I think about it every morning. I want to remember what it felt like to be thrown out of my own seat, so no one else ever has to feel that." A week later, Aurelia Air held a press conference to launch a new route of equality, connecting New York and San Francisco, designed jointly by Jordan and Emily. Before hundreds of reporters, Jordan said, "This route does not only connect 2 coasts of America, it connects the past with the future, a country once divided, with a generation now healing. Every flight is a promise that everyone deserves to sit in any seat they dream of." Applause thundered. Many asked about Emily Park, now called the unsung heroine of Aurelia Air. When she stepped up, cameras flashed. Emily spoke simply. "That day I did not think I was brave. I only thought that if I stayed silent, I could no longer look at myself in the mirror." Below the stage, Jordan watched her with pride. He knew that since that day, thousands of employees had chosen to face the mirror as she had. That evening, Jordan sat alone in his office. The sunset poured through the glass, reflecting him onto a wall of old photographs. One image drew his eye, the empty one. A seat, a small halo of light upon it, amid the darkness of the cabin. He smiled and called Emily. "Are you free? I would like you to fly with me on the first flight of Route of Equality." "Too great an honor," Mr. Chief Executive Officer Emily teased. "But, you know, I am training a new class." "Then train in the air," Jordan said. "I need the one person who knows better than anyone why we fly." 3 days later, Aurelia Flight EQ001 prepared to depart from New York. Along the fuselage, the words, "Fly with Dignity," were painted large, gleaming in the dawn. Jordan sat in the forward rows, not in seat 1A this time, but in the middle of the main cabin, beside an elderly Indian couple and a Latino student. Emily moved down the aisle, tightening belts, her smile gentle. A white boy, about 10 years old, pointed at Jordan. "Mom, is that the Chief Executive Officer Jordan?" Turned and smiled. "Yes, but today I am just a passenger, like everyone else." Soft laughter rippled through the cabin. Emily stood beside him and said quietly, "And I am just a crew member like everyone else, but I will always remember why I serve." The aircraft rolled. Through the window, the sky brightened sunlight, gilding the metal skin. As the plane lifted, Jordan closed his eyes and heard the cabin announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for choosing Aurelia Air, where everyone has a place, no matter who they are, where they come from, or what color their skin may be. The voice was Emily's. In that moment, Jordan felt something strange. He was no longer a chief executive officer. He was a person being carried by a sky made by human kindness. At cruising altitude, he looked out at an ocean of cloud. He remembered the moment 6 months earlier, when he was driven from seat 1A, when contemptuous stares surrounded him, when the silence of bystanders hurt more than the insult itself. Now, in these same heights, everything had reversed. Emily passed by and set a cup of coffee on his tray. First-class coffee, she joked. Jordan laughed. "And yours coffee of dignity," she said, stronger, but worth the taste. They both laughed. In the hum of the engines, Jordan felt he could hear the heartbeat of thousands of people who had learned to love again. Flight EQ-001 landed in San Francisco to resounding applause. Passengers stood and many came to shake Jordan's hand. A middle-aged woman said, "Another airline humiliated me once for dressing simply. Thank you for making me believe there is still a place to be respected." Jordan answered softly, "Thank you for flying with that belief." As the cabin emptied, Emily looked toward the distant one, A seat. She turned to Jordan and asked quietly, "Do you ever wonder who 1A belongs to?" Now Jordan smiled and replied, "To anyone who dares to face injustice, even if they are seated in the very last row." They stood together in the quiet cabin. Sunset light washed the rows of seats, and somewhere up in that sky, justice was still flying. 1 year after the 1A seat incident, Aurelia Air had become a story retold in every leadership classroom, every lecture on professional ethics, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed the company's transformation. Yet for Jordan Pierce, every mention of it still left a small scar in his memory, not because of the humiliation he once endured, but because of the promise he made to himself: never let justice stop at a single flight. On an early spring morning, Jordan stood atop the new headquarters in Chicago. The newly inaugurated Aurelia Center was designed around the philosophy of light and respect. No walls enclosed, everything was transparent glass. He gazed out over O'Hare Airport, coming alive with daylight, where planes bearing the words, "Fly with dignity," took turns rising into the sky. Inside, employees from all backgrounds prepared for a special anniversary flight, Flight 1A. Emily Park entered the office holding a passenger list. She had changed not just her title as Director of Cabin Crew Training, but her presence itself. The shyness that once marked her was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the dark and chosen to walk into the light. "The list is ready, Mr. Pierce," she said, "and I think you're going to like this flight." Jordan smiled as he sat down. "Who are the special passengers today?" Emily lifted the list. "No chief executives, no politicians, no investors, only people who were once rejected." Jordan looked up. "Rejected?" "Yes," she said with a soft smile. "People who were turned away elsewhere. A former flight attendant fired for her age, a disabled engineer rejected by 3 companies, an Arab student once denied boarding because he was suspect, and a 9-year-old black girl who just earned a full scholarship." Jordan nodded slowly. "A flight for those who once had no place." "Exactly," Emily replied. "But today they will sit in the very front." That afternoon, the departure gate was crowded with reporters. Outside, a silver-white aircraft named the Dignity One gleamed under the sunlight. Painted on its body was the new logo, "One Everyone Deserves a Seat." As the passengers boarded, cameras followed each story. 62-year-old Helen Brooks, a retired flight attendant from another airline, smiled radiantly as Emily helped her into seat 1A. Amir al-Karim, the young Arab student, shook Jordan's hand, his voice trembling. "Thank you, sir. This is the first time no one has asked me, 'Where are you from?' at check-in." Liam Turner, a disabled engineer, handed Jordan his ticket and said, "I don't want privilege just to be treated like everyone else. And today I finally am." The youngest little Maya Collins, her hair in neat braids and eyes wide with wonder, clutched a teddy bear as she sat in seat 1C. Looking around, she whispered, "Mum, this seat feels softer than my dreams." Emily bent down and said softly, "That's because you deserve it, Maya." The cabin doors closed. Jordan sat among everyone else. No one had priority. On Aurelia Air, every seat was seat 1A. As the engines roared to life, Jordan glanced at his phone, reading a message from Chief Financial Officer. Rachel Monroe National Television is broadcasting the flight live. Hashtag Flight 1A is trending worldwide. He smiled faintly and looked around the cabin. Emily walked the aisles, checking seatbelts, her eyes glowing with pride. A year ago, she had watched an airline fall apart under prejudice. Now she was flying with one celebrated as a symbol of human dignity. As she passed, Jordan whispered, "Today we're not just flying, we're rewriting history." Emily smiled back. "No, sir. We're simply giving history back to the people it belongs to." Mid-air at 30,000 feet, Jordan took the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jordan Pierce, founder of Aurelia Air. I'm not speaking to you as a chief executive officer, but as a passenger. 1 year ago, I was thrown out of my own first-class seat. Today, I want to tell you, first class no longer exists. What remains are first-class hearts." The cabin erupted in applause. Some passengers wiped away tears. Television cameras captured it, all the sunlight streaming through the windows, lighting up faces once shadowed by rejection. Emily moved down the aisle, handing each passenger a small card that read, "Aurelia Air. Thanks you for teaching us the courage to be ourselves." When she reached Maya, the girl looked up and asked Miss Emily, "What is justice?" Emily knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Justice is when everyone is treated fairly, even when no one is watching." Jordan overheard her and felt something stir deep within. He looked around the cabin, no luxury, no opulence yet. It glowed with a light he had spent his life searching for, the light of humanity. 3 hours later, the plane landed in Los Angeles. As the doors opened, reporters applauded. Maya ran to Jordan and hugged him, pressing her teddy bear into his hands. "This is lucky," she said. "I want you to have him, so if anyone ever makes you sad again, you'll remember someone believes you're good." Jordan smiled and hugged her gently. "I promise Lucky will always fly with me." Behind them, Helen, the veteran flight attendant, once dismissed for her age, turned to Emily and said, "You know, young lady, I've spent my life in the air, but this is the first time I've seen an airline that truly knows how to lift people up." Emily's voice trembled. "Because the sky isn't just for planes, it's for hearts that know how to fly." That night, the national news opened with footage of Flight 1A and the narration, "More than an airline." Aurelia Air has become a modern American symbol where equality is not a slogan, but an action. Across social media, millions shared the video of Jordan and Emily on the flight. Comments flooded in. "Thank you for reminding us that humanity can still be kind. This is the flight I'll tell my grandchildren about." Seat 1. At the seat of dignity. That evening, Jordan stood alone at the airport, gazing across the runway, where the Dignity One was being readied for its next journey. Emily walked over, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Still thinking, she asked. He nodded. I'm wondering, has the world really changed? She looked in the same direction. I don't know. But I do know this today, at least in this sky, justice learned how to fly. Jordan smiled, taking the cup from her. Dignity coffee, she laughed. Yes, the strongest blend we have. They stood quietly looking up at the night sky. An Aurelia air jet climbed, leaving a bright streak across the darkness. Listen, Emily said softly, that sky was once the place where you were humiliated. Now it's where they call you a hero. Jordan shook his head. No, Emily. I'm just someone who learned how not to stay silent. The hero is you. She smiled. No, it's everyone who chooses what's right. Every passenger today is part of that hero. Together they watched the plane fade into the clouds. Under the golden glow of the runway lights, Jordan said quietly, Justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to keep flying. And in that moment, it felt as if the sky itself was smiling. A year and a half after the 1A effect, the skies over America had changed, not in color, not from the paint of new airplanes, but from the restoration of faith. Aurelia Air was no longer just an airline. It had become a global symbol of equality. Universities were teaching the Aurelia model, and business magazines called Jordan Pierce, the man who turned prejudice into a global lesson. Yet whenever Jordan read those praises, he only smiled. Glory only matters when it leads to real change. On a sunny morning in May, the 28th floor of Aurelia Air headquarters glowed with golden light. Jordan was in a meeting with the executive team. On the big screen was a world map, its dots shining to represent the countries that had invited Aurelia to collaborate on corporate culture training. You know, said Chief Financial Officer Rachel Munro, the governments of Japan, Sweden and South Africa all want to use our Fly with Dignity program for their public service sectors. Jordan nodded, but his eyes wandered from the screen toward the horizon. That's good, he said, but let's make sure it doesn't become a marketing campaign. When ethics need a slogan to sell, they stop being ethics. The room chuckled softly, but everyone knew he meant every word. That afternoon, Jordan received an email from the United Nations, an invitation to speak at the Global Forum on Dignity and Equality in Geneva. The theme, When Justice Takes Flight. He read it in silence for a long while. Downstairs, Emily Park was preparing for a special training session, the first program for Aurelia's international crew. Jordan walked down and stood at the doorway, watching as Emily addressed the class. The trainees came from all over the world, a flight attendant from Kenya, a pilot from Japan, a service agent from Brazil, and a young woman from Vietnam named Linh Tran. Just 23, her eyes bright and full of confidence. You're not learning to work for an airline, Emily said, her voice steady and clear. You're learning to carry a message. Whether you're in Tokyo, Cape Town, or Buenos Aires, every flight you take will remind the world of one simple truth. Dignity is the common language of humanity. Jordan stood quietly. In their faces he saw himself 10 years ago, ambitious but not yet aware that compassion was the most valuable ticket of all. After the session he approached. Emily turned with a smile. Eavesdropping again, Mr. Chief Executive Officer. Listening to a teacher explain something no management book has ever taught, he replied softly. She laughed. And my students are teaching me that the world still has hope. Jordan nodded, his tone thoughtful. Do you think we should take this program to the world? Emily's eyes lit up. I've been waiting for that question all year. 2 months later, The Aurelia Air Global Summit was held in New York. Hundreds of representatives from airlines, human rights organizations, and universities gathered. Jordan's speech was broadcast live in 60 countries. He stepped onto the stage with no notes, no slides, only a microphone and a large photo behind him. An empty one. A seat in a softly lit cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began calmly, "I'm not here to talk about an airline. I'm here to talk about the people who were once told they weren't good enough to sit in the front row. I'm here to remind us that every organization, every company, every nation has its own 1A seat, a place where privilege sits, and where compassion is tested." He paused, scanning the room. "The question isn't who deserves to sit there. The question is whether we have the courage to share it." Applause began to ripple through the hall, but he continued. "Justice doesn't come from policy. It comes from the quiet actions of ordinary people like Emily Park, the young flight attendant who said no when everyone else stayed silent. Like Lynn Tran, who just helped a passenger with a disability board and said, 'No one should ever have to apologize for being treated kindly.'" Jordan looked up. "If you want to change the world, don't start with resolutions. Start with your gaze. Look at someone, really look at them, and treat them as if they matter." The audience rose to their feet. The applause thundered, and many wept openly. 3 days later, when Jordan returned to headquarters, he found a small parcel on his desk. There was no sender address, only a handwritten note from a passenger once removed from first class. "Thank you for making me believe the world can be better." Inside was an old, crumpled boarding pass with seat 1A circled in red. Jordan held it tightly, his chest heavy with emotion. He knew this was the reason he kept going. That afternoon, Emily knocked on his office door. "I just watched your speech," she said. "The whole world is talking about the 1A seat." "But do you know what moved me the most?" Jordan smiled. "What was it?" "It wasn't what you said," she replied. "It was how you looked when you talked about others. You didn't speak like a man who had won. You spoke like someone learning how to love the world again." Jordan fell silent. She was right. He had once hated the system that humiliated him. But now he understood. Hate never changes anything. Only humanity does. "Maybe I didn't change the world," he said quietly. "Maybe I just reminded it of something it had forgotten." "And what's that?" she asked. "Dignity," he answered, "the thing we are born with, but spend our lives searching for." That night, Jordan and Emily left the office late. Outside, the Chicago sky stretched like black silk, scattered with stars. In the distance, an Aurelia airplane took off its lights, cutting through the night like a beacon. "You know, Emily said tonight, I'm flying the first route to South Africa. We're bringing the training program there." Jordan looked at her pride shining in his eyes. "You'll do great. And when your plane lifts off, remember it's not just a flight. It's a movement. Proof that fairness can travel beyond borders." Emily smiled, gripping her suitcase. "I'll take those words with me." She turned her silhouette, fading into the light of the terminal. Jordan watched until the aircraft ascended its glow, slicing across the dark sky. At 30,000 feet, Emily looked down at the sparkling city below. She opened her notebook and wrote on the first page, "Justice needs no borders. Because every time we fly, we bring the world a little closer together." She closed the book and stared out the window. The sky was endless and black, yet to her, it had never shone brighter. And somewhere far below in his office, Jordan Pierce looked up at that same sky and smiled because He knew that when humanity takes flight, the sky itself no longer has boundaries. 2 years after Aurelia Air changed history, the world began to look up at the sky differently. The silver-winged aircraft of the airline could now be seen everywhere. Paris, Nairobi, Seoul, Sydney. It was no longer just a symbol of aviation, but a symbol of global humanity. In Geneva, the International Forum on Equality announced a new honor, the Dignity Wings, awarded to organizations that had taken flight through justice. The first recipient was Aurelia Air, represented by Jordan Pierce and Emily Park. As the two of them walked onto the stage, the entire hall rose to its feet. Jordan looked around the bright lights, reminded him of that first-class cabin years ago, the place where he had once been forced to leave. Now the world had invited him to return to tell that very story. That day, he began, I was stripped of my seat. But I came to understand that what truly matters is not the seat itself, but the person who sits in it. And today, standing here, I only want to tell the world one thing. Justice doesn't need to fly high. It only needs to fly far. The applause grew louder, but Jordan fell silent, turning toward Emily. She continued, her voice trembling slightly. Sometimes change doesn't begin with a crowd. It begins with a single small moment, the moment we choose not to stay silent. If you have ever thought you were too small to change the world, remember this. I was once just a flight attendant, and I watched an entire system bow to the truth. The hall erupted into thunderous applause as everyone rose once again. Two people, a CEO once humiliated, and a flight attendant who dared to say no, now stood together in the light, not to claim glory, but to return faith to the idea that kindness can still prevail. That evening, in their hotel suite overlooking Lake Geneva, Jordan opened his laptop and replayed an old video the moment he was removed from seat 1A, then stood his ground in the middle of that first-class cabin. He had never deleted it. Emily entered carrying 2 cups of hot tea. "You still keep that video?" she asked. Jordan nodded with a gentle smile. "I keep it to remember that justice doesn't just appear on its own. It needs someone to stand up for it, even if their hands are shaking." She was quiet for a moment, gazing out the window where moonlight shimmered across the lake. "And when someone stands up," she said softly, "the light flies backward from the ground to the sky." Jordan answered quietly, and then, at last, the world learns to lift its head. 3 years later, the Chicago sky blazed with the colors of an early summer sunrise. A new building had just been inaugurated, the Aurelia Institute for Human Dignity, an international training center for the study of human worth, co-founded by Jordan Pierce and Emily Park. At the opening ceremony, Jordan did not speak much. He simply stood in silence, watching the hundreds of young trainees who had come from every corner of the world, Africa, Asia, Europe, people of a new generation, who carried in their eyes the same light, the light of belief. Emily stepped up to the podium, her voice warm and calm. "Today we are not just opening an institute. We are opening a new chapter 1 where compassion is taught as a skill and fairness is practiced as a habit." She turned toward Jordan, and he nodded with a gentle smile. "We used to believe the sky was the limit," Jordan said softly, "but it turns out it was only the beginning. When people understand one another, every flight leads to freedom." The entire hall rose to its feet. Outside the glass windows, an Aurelia airplane lifted into the morning light, the sun reflecting off its body where a new line was painted, "For every heart that dared to fly." Emily gazed after it, her voice trembling slightly. We've flown so far, Jordan answered quietly. And justice is still flying. The sky stretched open, vast and blue, as if to remind them that the true legacy of humankind is not found in where they land, but in how they help the world rise with them. From the perspective of a leadership culture expert, the journey of Jordan Pierce and Emily Park is not merely a story about justice, but a testament that when compassion becomes the guiding compass, an entire system can be reborn. Because fairness is not built inside a courtroom, but within every small choice made each day. If you believe that this world can still become a better place, please like this video and subscribe to the channel to help spread stories of dignity and humanity. And before you leave comment the phrase, "Keep your dignity,"